Hi, and welcome to Success Stories for Increasing Participation. My name is Chelsea Novak, and I'll be the moderator of this session. This session is being recorded and will be shared out after the summit. If you haven't already, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat that you will find to the right of your screen. There you will also find the Q&A tab. Ask any questions that you have for the speakers there, and after all three presenters, we will have a Q&A time to address those. Our panelists today will touch on how sites have successfully increased participation in our area and across the country. They will cover identifying meetable needs within your community, activities to increase participation, seeking feedback from families, and more. First, we will hear from Kelsey Gross. Kelsey, Child Nutrition Outreach Supervisor, has worked for Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank for the last 8 years. Currently, she works to expand access to child nutrition programs in Allegheny County by creating and maintaining partnerships with providers, as well as marketing programs to eligible families. Take it away, Kelsey.
Hi everyone, just give me 1 second to share my screen. Okay, so as Chelsea said, I've worked for the food bank for about 8 years, always on the child nutrition department. And I've worked in 7 of the 11 counties that we serve. So sharing with you today are some of the things that I've seen in my 8 years with the food bank, as well as just talking with some partners and being on plenty of national calls from Share Strength and others. So first piece of advice that I always give either new summer food sites or those that are seeing that their numbers just aren't where they want them to be is go to where the kids are. It seems really obvious, but it's something that I think is definitely worth reminding, because there's a lot of sites out there that they want to serve in the place that's most convenient for them, but that's not necessarily the place that's most convenient for kids. So some of the examples that I have of sites and sponsors that have done a really great job of going to where the kids are. One is Trinity School District in Washington County. So during the summer, they served at 3 sites. One of them was in a housing community. And then whenever they switched back over to the school year, they wanted to serve even more kids. So what they did is they worked with a local shopping center and actually started serving out of a pop-up tent at a shopping center, and we're serving tons of kids because families were going there to shop. So that's just one example of going to where kids are. You heard from Steve Davis in the last session, and in addition to him in Allegheny County, we also have Center of Life and a couple other partners that are doing home delivery, which is made possible through the waivers this year. So if you have the volunteers and have the capacity, home delivery is definitely something to think about. Definitely be willing to move. So to give you an example, I think it is Berlin in Somerset County, we had a program that was happening at a church, and the church just wasn't getting very many kids. So what they did was they moved a little bit down the road to the park where kids were going already. So even though the site was super close, going to where kids were used to going and serving meals there brought them way more families to serve than if they would have continued that program at the church. So if you're not happy with your numbers, definitely consider moving to a place where kids are already going, because it's much easier to bring food to kids than to bring kids to the food. And if you are looking to expand, if you have more staff, whether you're a site or a sponsor, and are looking for additional areas to serve, make sure that you keep in touch with your Child Nutrition Outreach Coordinator, because we do this huge mapping project every year, and we can pinpoint where there are pockets of poverty in every single one of our counties, where there's a high number of kids that qualify for free or reduced meals. So we can make some recommendations based on that map of areas where you might be able to get a lot of kids. Next is trying to add additional food resources to your programs. So Helping Hands Food Pantry coordinates, I want to say it's between 4 and 6 sites now in Somerset County. And what they do is they would add on a backpack to their program, so that whenever they were only feeding kids once or twice a week, but they were adding a backpack of food for kids to take home so that they had food to last until the next time that site was serving. And they were doing this because they were a food pantry. They were connected to the food bank in that way already. So they were able to add this through just extending their existing backpack program into the summer. Woodland Hills School District also added food boxes to their distribution of grab-and-go school meals early on in the pandemic. So we were able to connect them with a different department at the food bank who was able to get food boxes to them for families that were coming for those grab-and-go meals. And then I always suggest that summer food sites and sponsors share pantry, produce to people, and SNAP information with all of the families that are coming to them. And that's something that we can help you with. And produce to people isn't happening right now, but for SNAP information, pantry, and some of the other distributions that we have going on at the food bank, we can get you any of that information that's relevant to your area for you to be able to share with families. Next is gardens and growing. So these two pictures on the sides are of a community site that we had at Gray Community Park, which is a tiny little rural site in Somerset County. And Georgia Sheftick, being the rock star that she is, the head of Helping Hands Food Pantry, helped get that site started. And then because of her connection with the Penn State Master Gardeners, being a Master Gardener herself, she was able to work with them to get these awesome community gardens set up. And on their kickoff day, they had the kids plant these marigolds where they got to put their names next to them and watch them grow for the summer. And it was really great for two reasons. So one, kids were able to get produce and take that home from the community garden. And two, it was something that kept kids coming back day after day because they wanted to see how their plants were doing. Similarly, this little girl in the middle is from Village of Rhoades in Fayette County, which participated in a project that a volunteer started with 4 of our sites. So they made it all about growing vegetables, and I believe it was cherry tomatoes for that year. So the first day of the project, kids were given these pop bottles to decorate, which eventually became the planters. So the first week, it was decorating the pop bottles. The next week, it was filling them with dirt. The next week after that, it was putting the seed in. And for the next 2 weeks, kids got to watch their plant grow. And then they also had families submit recipes around ways to use cherry tomatoes. So it was something, again, that kept kids wanting to come back through the summer, and it taught them all about how food is made. Next, I would suggest adding additional meals. So if you are a site that didn't bundle last year, one thing that you can do is consider bundling your meals. So the second point down here, you can bundle multiple days worth of meals and multiple meals in a day. So we had some sites that were giving families 7 days worth of meals during a 1-hour distribution 1 day a week. We have other sites that were operating Monday, Wednesday, and other ones that were Tuesday, Thursday, and they were able to spread their staff and allow for more sites to be open because they didn't have to operate 5 days a week during a set hour meal serving time. So definitely think about bundling your meals this year, and if you're a sponsor that's interested in this, we can help you with menu suggestions and all those types of things that you might need to think about in bundling. But it really made a huge difference, and in talking to all of the sponsors in our area, we think that bundling and grab and go were the 2 things that helped drive up the number of meals that were served this summer. The other thing that I'd like to mention on this slide is using the breakfast reimbursement for a super snack. So if your times don't line up or you don't think that breakfast would be well received by your kids, you can use the breakfast guidelines to create what some sponsors call a super snack. So you don't have to call it breakfast, and it doesn't have to look like breakfast. It just needs to meet these guidelines. So you could do a milk, applesauce, and a Nutri-Grain bar, for instance. And that would be considered a super snack that you don't have to call breakfast if your kids don't like breakfast. So we have a couple sponsors that did this, and it really helped boost the number of meals that were going out through their program. And then last point to make on this slide, don't forget to consider your serving time. In the summer, kids tend to wake up later. So We've definitely seen that those sites that have a later meal serving time, and I'd suggest maybe 12 to 1 if you're looking for an hour, those sites tend to do better than those sites that serve from 10 to 11, for instance. And last thing I just wanted to mention is feedback is so important in making sure that your kids, your families, and your sites feel heard around the different types of foods that you're providing. We've done, as a sponsor, we've done taste tests with kids to help gear up for the summer and to help shape our menus for the summer. The picture that I have here, this is from Duquesne, West Mifflin Boys and Girls Club. We were trying to figure out which kind of vegetables kids would like the most. So we had all kinds of different vegetable dishes, and we let kids pick, and then they voted based on a smiley face scale, whether they liked it or didn't. And these kids, I think it was, they picked this bean salsa, and of all the raw vegetables, they liked the cauliflower best. So those are the things that we went with for the summer. But taste tests are wonderful. It gets kids involved. It makes them feel like they have a stake in the program. And whenever they see something that they voted for come through on the summer food menu, they get excited to try that again. Next is surveys for staff. Again, we had, it was actually this site, Duquesne West Mifflin Boys and Girls Club. They were keeping notes on their menu for us for the things that kids really liked or didn't. So that's something that is super easy for sites to do. They would just write a note whether the kid liked whatever it was that day or didn't like some component of whatever it was that day. And then when we would go, we'd take a picture of the menu to remind us to look at all of that feedback from the sites. You can also do surveys with your sites. We'd recommend doing it at a midpoint through the summer and then at the end of the summer to help coordinate for next year. You can also ask other sponsors for menus, and you can go through your coordinator at the food bank for that. We collect them year after year, so we can share those with you if you need some ideas for how to incorporate more things into your menu. The USDA Team Nutrition website is also an awesome resource. They have menus that can go to any scale that you need them to, both for hot items and cold items that are reimbursable through the meal requirements of the summer food program. And then lastly, partnering with nutrition education resources has been a wonderful thing for us. So we worked with community gardens. Adagio has been an awesome partner in just trying to teach kids about the food that they're seeing on their plate and why we're, giving them the required half a cup of vegetables and why it's important for them to try that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelsey. That was a great presentation. And just a reminder, if you have any questions for Kelsey or any of the future presenters, feel free to put that in the Q&A and we'll get to those later. So next we have Pastor Lance. Pastor Lance serves as a senior pastor of Tree of Life Open Bible Church, which he started with his wife 16 years ago in their one-bedroom apartment. Tree of Life now serves the Brookline community in a 20,000 square foot facility, providing essential needs to the community, including a mid-sized food pantry, CACFP and SFSP programming, and more. Go ahead, Pastor Lance.
Thank you so much for allowing me to share today, and I just really appreciate this as an opportunity. This has been a great event, seeing and hearing all the wonderful ideas. I'm here today to share a little bit about our story and perhaps some ways that you might be able to increase some participation in many of your centers. I function primarily in an urban context. We're here in the southern part of the city of Pittsburgh. And as was shared, my wife and I started our church in our one-bedroom apartment about 16 years ago. And 3 years ago, we moved here into the Brookline community, taking a historic church facility that is about 20,000 square feet in size. We moved here because our congregation had obviously outgrown our one-bedroom apartment and our other facility that we were in at the time. But this was a big jump for us. But it centered around this one idea. The facility that we're in is a 120-year-old church facility, and that due to dwindling congregation size and impact, unfortunately, the congregation closed. But we were looking and growing, so we took over the facility, and we began to really wrestle and ask these questions. What would it look like to really be essential? That if a church closes, does the community really know? And our heart was to make sure that our community was being blessed and impacted by the work that we do. And this led us to being engaged and involved in a number of initiatives, which include hosting a mid-sized food pantry and ultimately growing our after-school programming as well as our summer feeding program. And once COVID hit in, everything, of course, for everybody was radically changed, and it required us to adapt. And I believe that each and every one of us organizationally are looking to adapt. We didn't have a strong summer feeding program because it was really going to be our first year and doing this. And the first week we set out to do this, we had no idea how many kids would come. And we've developed partnerships within our local elementary and middle schools that are closest to us due to the pandemic shutdowns, and just try to let people know we'll be here, we'll open up, and we'll serve food. And thankfully, through the wonderful partnership with the Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank, we've been able to source the food inexpensively and be able to make something that was really something special. And I remember the first day at over 300 kids came in, and I looked at everybody and I said, I don't know how we're going to do this. And we dealt with a lot of logistical issues and a lot of challenges. We had to adapt, and adapt is the word of the day and word of the season. And I think a lot of times we all, especially those in nonprofit or religious communities, spend a lot of time focusing in on what we don't have or the gaps that we have that are going to keep us struggling or having a hard time for us to be able to impact people that we're doing. And since the beginning of the pandemic and throughout over this last year, we've been able to serve breakfast, lunch, and dinner through our facility, as well as maintaining our pantry and doing a wide number of other things with a small number of staff and an incredible number of volunteers who've been able to do some wonderful things. And so I talked about the gap. A lot of times we have the gap that we get worried about, but I'd like to just encourage you to consider a gap. And this is what I had to do in order to develop through this. And as an adaptive leader, the first step that we all have to do is to really step away from the front lines for a minute and really analyze what is going on, gain a larger and higher perspective to the situations that we are facing. Throughout this summer, I'm sure we're all going to be experiencing things. And if we get lost in the front lines, just directly serving our children as the leaders, we're going to miss out on being able to adapt and change as the impacts are necessary. So whenever we do that, we take an adaptive position, we step back, and we raise up other leaders to be able to do some of the work that we need to be able to do, empowering volunteers or staff to be able to listen and encourage. And that gap caused us to have to create new systems that would encourage us to be able to maintain a vision that fed children and fed families while simultaneously working on adjusting programs and processes that we had to. While we processed a myriad of waivers and questions that were happening, some days we set out to prepare cold meals that people could microwave at home. And then my volunteers were coming back and saying, Pastor Lance, some of our families don't have microwaves. So I just microwaved in the kitchen microwave. And I said, well, we got to fix this. And we started making warmer meals and meals that were ready to go, ready to eat instead of just grab and go cold. And I realized that is different in every context. But I learned that because I created a gap and I empowered my volunteers and staff to be able to listen and ask questions. And whenever challenges arose, I had systems in place where we could talk regularly so I could learn and could then use my skill and gifting and ability as the leader of our organization to be able to make the changes happen. So the gap was something that created distance, and that actually empowered us to be able to do more because we gave others the ability to serve. It also called on parents and people to be involved, encourage people to raise up more volunteers and gather more people and cast vision so that everybody that was involved could be involved somehow. We also listened for other challenges over this last year that children are facing, whether it was, wanting to have some more things to do, creating activity packets for people to have more things to do at home, providing extra like little prizes with little snacks or crafts. Ultimately, we also had a great partnership where we got donations from Walmart and Amazon to be able to give away toys and prizes to individuals. We told a lot of our stories in social media. And again, because of the gap, I was able to manage a lot of things like that while the kitchen staff and volunteers are able to work with the people that are actually there. And so I think one of the biggest things that we look at when it comes to volunteer recruitment is, can we tell a story, and do we actually know how to tell people that we have a need? And again, having a gap between me and the front lines means that I could help nurture those stories and be able to communicate those stories whenever things would come up. We should always be ready to say, when someone comes up to us, how can I help? And we should always have an idea. And I want to encourage you to not be afraid of crazy ideas. There was a time where we had been given an opportunity to receive some toys that I needed to have shipped in, and we needed $1,500 to do so. And we didn't have $1,500. And literally 3 days later, someone called me on the phone and said, I heard you're serving food. What else do you want to do? And I said, I need $1,500 to be able to buy these toys. And they said, I'll drop a check off tomorrow. You know, if we have our crazy ideas and that we can dream and come up with because of the gap, or because we allow our volunteers, our staff to be able to share the wonderful ideas, or we listen to the needs, or we empower people, we'll be amazed at the way that we can connect with individuals. We honestly probably all have donors and individuals in our circles that would be able to step up at a higher level than what we're used to, or what we have seen in the past. And the reason why they haven't yet is because we haven't given them all enough of a convincing story. But how much more convincing of a story could it be than sitting down with our families and telling stories about grandparents that are coming in to pick up 8 meals for their grandkids, you know, while their families are in the hospital, or challenges that we're facing, or saying, hey, we're microwaving meals for families that don't have microwaves, and somebody says, can I go buy the microwaves? You know, these kind of things that we deal with whenever we hear the stories and build systems to talk about stories. So last thing I will leave you with is this. If we can build systems among our teams where we can always celebrate stories that we have, I start every staff meeting and volunteer meeting out this way, where we say, please tell me what was something good that you saw happen through what you've been doing over the last week. And whenever we do that, all of our staff have a moment every meeting where we're refreshed and we hear stories about individuals, some by name, some just general gists. But we start every story off with a celebration, and every staff meeting starts with a celebratory story. And every one-on-one meeting that I have with staff, I'm asking what's going on, how can we help, what do we need to do, and we can be able to make things happen and do that. So that would be my last thought I want to give you today. Mind the gap. Don't be afraid of it. Create it, use it, utilize it to strengthen your organization and the impact that you're having. Stay connected to those that are distant from you, but empower them to be able to serve your community in the great ways that you have already been doing. Thank you so much for allowing me to share today.
Thanks, Pastor Lynn, for sharing about your work. It was very encouraging to hear. So we have one more speaker for this session. Emily, PA, is a program manager at No Kid Hungry Center for Best Practices in Washington, D.C., where she works to increase access to summer meals and school meals, especially through the adoption and expansion of the community eligibility provision. Prior to working for No Kid Hungry, Emily was a Peace Corps volunteer in Botswana, where she worked on community management of malnutrition projects and marveled at the country's universal free school breakfast and lunch. Thanks for being with us today, Emily.
Thank you so much. And I have 2 tough acts to follow. You guys are amazing and shared so many amazing examples. Thank you so much for all that you do and for your leadership. I am really excited to be here with you today. As I put in the chat, I'm from Pittsburgh, so it's extra special to talk with folks from PA and from my hometown. I now currently work for No Kid Hungry in Washington, D.C. I do support the community eligibility provision, which is a school meals program. I also support the summer food service program, and I am not a sponsor. I just get to hear the amazing stories of sponsors around the country. and get to kind of share those back out. So that's what I'm here today to do, is to share some exciting examples of work that is creative and that centers kids and families to increase participation in summer meals. And I'm specifically focusing on stories from COVID. So I know things are looking very different this year than previous summers. Some in good ways, like the ability to do non-congregate meal service and allow kids to take meals home with them. And then some harder ways of dealing with the pandemic and not having the ability to do as many activities and really have kids in a central place playing together and doing fun things together. So I want to start us off with kind of grounding us in barriers that kids may face in accessing summer meals programs. We know that when kids have access to healthy meals, they have the fuel that they need to grow and thrive and learn and play and do all of the wonderful things that kids do. Yet sometimes there are still access barriers to summer meals programs, especially given that kids are dispersed throughout the community. And so at No Kid Hungry, we're constantly thinking of how can we work directly with kids and families? How can sponsors and site staff ask kids and families for their feedback, learn from kids and families about what they want to see through every stage of designing and delivering school meals program or summer meals programs. And so today I'm going to kind of focus on some of these barriers that we hear, thinking about language barriers for families who speak languages other than English, heightened fears around immigration status per the last administration. And although the public charge rule has been blocked, there are still a lot of families with immigration and refugee status who are a little shell-shocked and afraid to access public benefits. So what impact does that have on summer meals programs and perception of the safety of them if you're in a community with families who have immigration or refugee status? Cultural and religious food preferences. If you serve a community where there is a high Muslim population, is there pork on your menu? And are there alternatives if there is? So thinking about what is it that kids and families in the community like to eat, and is that reflected on the menus? Pastor Lance brought up great points around access to fridges and freezers and microwaves and stoves. We know that not all kids have access to these things, and the pandemic has certainly heightened housing insecurity. And so if you're doing a bulk meal service and serving meals that will need to be cooked or reheated throughout the week, have you checked in with families who may not have access to things to reheat those meals? And then how can you work with your community to accommodate those unique circumstances? Things like schedules of essential workers, so important to take into account if you're designing your site and your meal distribution around the schedules of essential workers, making sure that there's an afternoon time after work hours or an early morning time. And the best way is to survey families and parents and ask what times work best for them. It'll definitely work to increase participation. Transportation barriers, huge, obviously always in the summer meals program. And comfortability with the meal site location. So does your community reflect your site staff, and does your site staff reflect your community? And if not, what are some ways that you can bring in volunteers who are from the community, who can be the ones distributing the meals and make families and kids feel more comfortable in attending? So I want to share with you some really great resources that we have developed at No Kid Hungry in the past year, and I'm going to throw the links to these in the chat. The first one is conversation starters for designing more inclusive school meals programs, but all of the questions relate to summer as well. And so these provide questions like, have you worked with the social worker to identify families who may need extra support or may need some accommodations for the meal delivery? And so it's a list of questions that we really recommend you working through with your staff and your volunteers and your community partners to identify access barriers that you might not have seen or might not have considered, and then ask questions of how you can overcome those access barriers. This next one, I'll pull the link for you, Let Your Community Shape Your Program, is very similar but has a lot of examples and case studies of schools and nonprofits who have worked directly with kids and families to shape their meals program in both the design of it and in the delivery of it. And then the last one I want to share, and some examples from my presentation today are pulled from this resource, Strategies to Increase Meal Participation. This features a bunch of strategies that we've heard from around the country that are working well during COVID to increase meal participation, and examples of some rockstar nonprofits and schools that are really doing innovative work. So those, please feel free to read at your leisure, and there's lots of great examples, and I'm just going to pull a couple here. And based on kind of the higher themes that we see. So I've been emphasizing seeking feedback from kids and families directly, not just after a meal is served, but before, in the planning time. Like, what, as Kelsey mentioned, taste tests, what do you want to see on the menus throughout the summer? As opposed to, so framing it kind of before you design your menus rather than afterwards, did you like that or not? So again, great ways to ask kids what they like via social media, having polls. Kids, Kelsey mentioned reach kids where they're at. Kids are on social media, so if you can either yourselves as your sponsors and site staff be on social media and engaging with kids, or you could ask kids to volunteer and kind of take over the media accounts that you may have for a day to run polls and get the word out about the meals program and to get feedback. And working with trusted community partners. We, as sponsors, you may not have relationships with all of the communities that you're trying to reach, and that's okay. That's what community partners come in for. And so how can you work with a local church? How can you work with a local nonprofit organization that is dedicated to reaching the immigrant community in your larger community? And then be able to work with them both as trusted messengers or as sites for meal distribution. And so the example for seeking feedback from kids and families that I want to highlight today is a nonprofit that is a summer and after school meal sponsor in North Carolina, in Charlotte. They're called Our Bridge for Kids. And they have an incredible summer meals program. They primarily serve immigrant and refugee communities. And so they realized that while they had staff that were directly from their communities that they were trying to serve, they did not have anyone on staff from their Burmese community in Charlotte. And so they actually hired one of the parents in the community to help design the menus and actually walk through grocery stores that that Burmese families would shop through and say, this is what we would buy, here are the brands that we would buy. And that completely renovated their menus for their Burmese community specifically. And the families really appreciated that extra effort that only really bringing on a parent from that community could have resulted in. And so now they've seen an increase in participation with that community. And before they hired Tintin, they were not having as much success with reaching the Burmese families. Another great example that I want to share around communication and marketing comes from the Vaughan Next Century Learning Center in California. So they are a school district, but they're a charter school, and they have an incredible summer meals program and school meals program. They do translation of all of their information about the program, whether it's via flyers or via social media or via meetings. They actually, as you can see at the bottom here, they host family Zoom forums to kind of tell families about the program, let them know what's happening, and to get questions and answer those questions directly from families. And they do those in both English and Spanish, as those are the two languages spoken in their community. They do family surveys around what's the best days and times to pick up meals. And as Pastor Lance mentioned, the school nutrition staff here and the summer meals program staff here, they are constantly showing up to community meetings, to school meetings. They're infusing the language about the program into messages that superintendents, principals, and teachers send out when they're communicating with families. So the meals program is constantly front and center. And so that's been a really helpful way to just continue to reiterate the importance of participation. And they actually framed it as, if you want these meals to continue long term, we need you guys to participate. It's not just us helping you, it's you helping us. So when you participate in the meals program, we're able to continue to invest in our staff and in the food quality. And if you don't participate, then it's harder for us to bounce back when we go back to school in the following year. So I thought those were some really unique framing of how to engage families and talk with them and ask them to participate in the languages that they feel comfortable with, and through multiple key messengers in their community. Community partnerships, Kelsey and Pastor Lance highlighted so many of these. I loved the example of gardening and having local producers and farmers sourcing produce from them and including that on the menu, and then highlighting that can be a really great way to increase participation and for the community to see themselves reflected in the program. And any ways that, I think Pastor Lance talked about this so beautifully, any ways that you can support wraparound services for the whole family. And that doesn't mean that that has to come out of your budget, but if a family says, you know, we're struggling with keeping the lights on, how can you work with community partners to figure out who would be best to help? How can you work with the SNAP enrollment office to get families enrolled in SNAP so that it's not just meals for kids, but they're getting support for the whole family? Transportation partnerships, again, reaching kids where they're at this summer. Most are at home. And so how can you work with either your school district or a local transportation authority to get meals out to kids? And so I love this example from Humboldt, California. They're a huge rural distribution area, and they partnered with UPS to get coolers onto the UPS trucks. And then when they would go out into the community, there would be some staff member from the community to be able to get that cooler off the bus and do, or off of the truck to do meal service at a location that was closer. But the central kitchen had no way of traveling that far, and it was really expensive, and UPS was able to do it and provide that option. So really creative ways to reach rural areas. My community partnership example on this slide comes from a school district in Texas that actually brought parents on board to advertise the meals that the program was serving via their personal social media accounts. And these moms called themselves the momfluencers. And it really did increase participation because you're using trusted messengers. It's other parents in the community to say, like, hey, look at what my kid picked up today. So excited to have these meals available, and here's where you can get it. And they actually also worked with the moms to say, like, if someone asked questions about the meal service, or if they had feedback that was delivered on their personal social media accounts, that feedback the moms would then channel that back to the site staff. So really innovative ways, again, to increase participation and to work with the community. And then the last example I have here is just thinking outside the box and getting creative. So Pastor Lance highlighted some of these raffles and prizes and theme days we've heard to be successful. TikTok, I know nothing about creating TikToks, but kids do. And so if, again, they could take over and create a TikTok, and that to go out to the whole community and for people to see the meals program reflected in their social media, again, might not be the first thing that comes to mind to increasing participation, but in reaching kids where they're at, that's where they're at. So we've heard some fun examples of meals program sponsors using TikTok to get the word out. Fun packaging for meals. There's an example of a sponsor that when they do themed cultural meals, so one example is when they have Chinese cuisine on their menu, they'll get those takeout containers, and that will be the packaging for the meals that day. So ways to keep it fun and exciting. And recipe cards, of course, if you're serving bulk meal components, and kids might have to create, you know, a yogurt parfait if they've got berries and granola and yogurt in bulk. How can they put that together? And can you design those recipe cards to be fun and colorful? And the example that I want to highlight here is another district in Texas, in San Antonio. On their mobile meals buses, they actually attached speakers like megaphones and then played the ice cream truck sound when they were delivering meals throughout their community. And it increased participation 800 to 2,300 kids per day. So had a huge impact. And just another way to think outside the box. They were like, kids are in their homes and they're not coming out when the meals truck are showing up in their neighborhoods. What can we do? And someone was like, what about the ice cream sound? And it really worked. So again, knowing your community and not being afraid to try new things. Here's my email address. Thanks so much for having me on today, and excited to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you so much, Emily. Yeah, so we are going to move into a question and answer time. So if you have a question for any of the three speakers, go ahead and put it in the chat. But I have a few for us to get started with. Pastor Lance, maybe you can start with this, and if anyone else has anything to share, but do you have any suggestions for volunteer recruitment?
Yeah, first thing is you've got to have a good story and be able to tell it confidently. Volunteers are attracted to having a good story and knowing that they're a part of it. That's the biggest thing. You know, it's like we're telling a story with our food service and people see themselves as one chapter in that story. Can we help them understand which chapter they fit in from beginning to end? So first step is telling a good story, knowing exactly where people are going to fit. And then the last thing I would say is making sure that we can very clearly communicate expectation so that it's like, this is what you're going to do, this is how you're going to do it, this is the benefit of doing so. And then they're like, oh, I'm in, because I want to be part of that, and make it irresistible. They'll be big.
That's great. Emily or Kelsey, do you have anything to add to that question?
I would just say now is the perfect time to start talking to those college students in your life and high school students that might be looking for something to do over the summer, especially during COVID, when there's not as many summer programs and all of that going on. So if you have college students or high school students, definitely tap them as volunteers for your site. Kids tend to bring more kids, and I've seen high school students really bring a whole lot of younger kids into summer food sites.
Much to add beyond. Teens are great. Teens, when kids come to meal sites, their kids and teens as leaders and role models. I love Kelsey's example of working with teenagers, especially high school students who are in the community and who are well known in the community.
Great. Our next question is, what kind of activity plans have you seen for this summer? With grab-and-go meals being the popular option, what suggestions do you have for including activities?
Talk about some of the partnerships that we had last year. So Adagio Health worked with us and did a walking contest with some of our sites. So they were able to provide pedometers, big pieces of poster board that were set up in a really cool way. And I want to say they worked with 8 or 10 sites where kids would keep track of their steps. And then throughout the county, the kid that had the most steps in the county and then the kid that had the most steps at each site ended up getting prizes for the summer. So it was something to encourage them to stay active, which I know is especially important during COVID when a lot of us were stuck in the house. So that was really successful. The other thing that we did with Adagio is they were able to provide 8 weeks worth of 8 different activity packets around nutrition education and exercise. So whenever kids would come to the site, most sites picked like a specific day a week that those kids would receive those activity booklets, and that was something that kids really enjoyed as well. We worked with a few other organizations that provided some cool things to kids. So American Heart Association, I think they also did pedometers for some of our sites. We had little toys that went out with some of our sites. We had gift cards where the site operators would put a sticker or something on the bottom of a couple of the bags, and whichever kid happened to get that grab and go bag would get a gift card or something like that, just to encourage more kids to keep coming to the sites. And it's not as extensive as normal activities would go, but it was something to at least add something to what sites were doing last summer. I think gardens would also be a good thing because it's outside, you can still be socially distant. And we're going to be releasing some guidance around activities as well that you'll hear from your coordinator, some of the things that'll be available for this coming summer.
I think those are all some great ideas. I think I would propose everybody's context is going to look, unique to what it is that you're doing at your site. And I would point back to the importance of building strong communication with families that are coming, identify what kind of things that they value, and then respond appropriately. But we do know there are a handful of things that kids do respond generally well, and so if we can participate, we love to do a lot of art. That's a lot of things that we do. So like chalk art was like a big thing. We had chalk art designs, all across the whole front of the church facility. Often invite people to build and participate every day. What's the new design? Another thing that we did was we put in puzzle pieces. Like we made a puzzle and created like a puzzle. So if you came all 5 days that week, it built a story. And then if you brought the completed thing back, we gave an extra prize the following week for doing so. We also did that with like multi-day trivia or little activity things, but it was to go. The other thing, again, this was where we were talking about our outdoor giveaway. We could focus on things that they like. We find out, we need baseball bats and gloves, or we need kickballs and jump ropes, things like that. Identifying what is appropriate for your community and finding a way to get those out quickly. And if you cast vision, I'm sure there's going to be a partner somewhere that's going to say, oh, I want to give 100 jump ropes away to kids. Let's do it.
The last thing I'll add, those are all brilliant examples. We put in the chat some of the links to, it's a compilation of packets of activities that you might print and give out at meal sites. So we had someone help us compile all of those from every corner of the internet. So now it's in one place. It was originally created for after school because there is a requirement in the after school meals program to have an activity component, but it definitely doubles for summer as well. So there's also a link to virtual activities that you might be able to share and use. And only thing I wanted to add is if there's an opportunity to work with a library and kind of get kids to be reading over the summer too. We know every summer there's a slide in stimulation and educational enrichment opportunities for kids who come from families with lower incomes. So if there's a way, again, to partner with libraries, they're always looking for ways to get books in kids' hands. So can you kind of co-locate your sites with libraries or have a bookmobile doing rounds with the meals truck? So those are some examples.
Great, thank you so much. I don't see any other questions, so we're going to go ahead and close this session. So thank you so much, Kelsey and Pastor Lance and Emily, for being with us and for your great presentations about increasing participation.